through this big open space where there were a bunch of other people. And so either on your way to the restroom or on your way back, you're likely to bump into people and have, hallway conversations. He designed the office space specifically so that people couldn't hide off at corners. He forced them to come together and mingle. As a side note to managers and executives, there are known ways to create corporate cultures that encourage creativity. For all the talk that we hear about group decision-making in flat organizations, it turns out that although people want to have a say and they want their voices to be heard, they're actually happy to have a decision-maker. They want the sense that there's somebody in charge. Not surprisingly, people want to work in places where the management treats them well, treats them as they would want to be treated themselves. And they like to work where the game is the thing, where making the game is what matters, and people are recognized for striving for the common good rather than for their own ego or for personal agendas. They want to work where managers give credit where credit is due. And they want an environment that encourages playfulness, even though making games is serious business. So our next step, step 5, from a creativity point of view, the more you know, the more creative you can become. Creativity is about new associations. The more you know about other fields, the more new associations you can make. There's a book called The Medici Effect. And the author here claims that creativity lies at the cross-section of diverse fields, industries, disciplines, and cultures. Everything you learn is the foundation for what comes next. The more skills you have, the more opportunities you have to display your creativity. He points out that Darwin was a geologist when he proposed the theory of evolution, and it was an astronomer who finally explained what happened to the dinosaurs. A great example of this comes from Mick Pierce, who was an architect charged with building an energy-efficient skyscraper in Zimbabwe. Through his study of nature, Pierce came to learn that termites have a need to keep their food at a constant temperature of 30 degrees Fahrenheit, when the temperatures outside their nest might fluctuate between 0 and 40 degrees. The termites solved this problem with an ingenious set of vents inside their nests, their mounds, which they go around and open and close in the course of the day, causing air to flow up through there. The Eastgate Center in Zimbabwe has a similar construction, which completely eliminated the need for mechanical air conditioning and heating. And without Pierce's interest in what he calls biomimicry, this building would never have been built. So many creators exhibit this same sense of curiosity and learning outside of their own field. Here's Thomas Edison, who had in his life 1,093 patents. But actually, only a handful of those patents were design patents for original stuff. Over 1,000 of his patents were what are called utility patents, which are filed for improving existing technologies. This means he had a habit of looking at different things in the world and seeing them differently and trying to reimagine how knowledge from one domain might influence another. Edison's probably most famous for inventing the light bulb. But in truth, he didn't invent it. There were 22 people before him who had passed electricity through electrical current through filaments in order to make them glow. But one day, Edison was on a fishing trip to the Midwest. Actually, he had gone out to the American West to observe an eclipse. Here's a guy who's interested in all kinds of things. He's gone out, made a long journey in that time, it was difficult, to observe this eclipse. And so while he's fishing, he notices he's using a bamboo rod, and he starts to think about bamboo and its different properties, and he says, I wonder if a bamboo sliver, if I carbonized that, if it would make a better filament inside of the light bulb. And he came back to his lab in New Jersey, and he took the light bulb from something that would burn for 13 hours and therefore was of no commercial use whatsoever to something that would burn for 1,200 hours. And combining that with his delivery of the way he did his generators and the way he had his electrical grid, he didn't come up with the idea of the light bulb. What he came up with was a way to make it practical. So this trait of cross-disciplinary curiosity and learning is something that we all need to do. I had been making AAA games in this industry for 24 years, and then suddenly this free-to-play tidal wave sweeps over all of us. And so I had to adapt and learn, and we all have to keep adapting and learning new technologies if we want to stay in this business. So that's a lot of theory. Let's put this in practice and build some lifelong strategies for being creative. How do you actually do this stuff? The first step on any project is to know your goal. When we begin a game project, we need to thoroughly understand why it is that we're building it. By what criteria are we going to judge it? What does success look like? Is it to make money for the company? Could be a good idea. Is it to create a work of art? Also a good idea. Is it to meet a deadline imposed by a licensing contract? I have worked on all of these kinds of projects. And as I think about it, I think that the creative process has a shape to it. Once you understand the goal, this is what the process actually looks like. At the beginning, you're the explorer. You remember from Van Eyck, the 4 different personality types. At the beginning, we throw our own arms out open wide. We do research, we explore, we brainstorm, we watch movies, we examine the competition, we think about wild and crazy ideas. If you're a designer, you sit down and you force random ideas together. If you're a writer, you sit down at the computer and just let the words come without any internal editing. You just let the ideas flow. If you're an artist, you're going to be sketching. You're going to be pulling together references. You're going to be making mood boards, that sort of thing. If you're a programmer, you're going to fool around with a bunch of prototypes, be thinking about different architectures. There's a time at the beginning of the project is when you throw your arms wide and think anything is possible. Linus Pauling, who's the only person to ever be awarded 2 Nobel Prizes that were non-shared, that he received just himself, he said the best way to get a good idea is to get lots of ideas. This is the time to get lots of ideas. In the middle of the project, you have to start thinking critically about those ideas that you've collected. You need to start curating them, and you need to start alternating between the role of the artist and the role of the judge. Instead of just accepting any idea, you have to evaluate them against the goals that you set. You start to question which ideas are feasible, which can you actually do, what can my team actually build, and what can they not. You start to see what constellations of ideas start to fit with each other. You try them on like suits of clothes, and so this one kind of seems to fit, and this one kind of seems to not. And so you accept some ideas and reject others. When you remember how the psychologist Brian Bates said that creative architects delayed decisions as long as possible, this is still that period of time. You want to delay these decisions. You don't want to make any decisions that you don't have to. You want to wait for the game to tell you what it needs. It's well established in creative literature that ideas benefit from a period of incubation. You collect all your material, and then sometimes you stop thinking about it. You step away from it. You go to bed. You take a little vacation. You've done your collection work. You let your unconscious mind, the unconscious intellect, work on those ideas, and then when you come back to them, suddenly you have this creative leap, this moment. Where did that idea come from? This happens to you when you're taking a shower or walking the dog or doing any kind of road activity. But at the end of this project, you need to be the warrior. You need to be the gatekeeper. You need to make those decisions and implement them. During the previous phase, you identified those core pillars of your project. And now you start to ruthlessly reject ideas that don't fit. Now you're the gatekeeper. An idea might be the coolest thing ever, but if you can't make it work, you have to reject it. It doesn't get into the game. Writers call this killing our babies. You write a passage that you really love, and then it just doesn't fit, and so you have to exit out. That's hard. So along the way, you're going to have many different kinds of creative sessions. And one of the distinguishing features, the distinguishing talents of a senior creative is that he or she can look at a problem quickly and decide how best to attack it. So some problems lend themselves to group brainstorming sessions. If you're trying to come up with a name for a game, for example, you don't want to lock a guy in a room by himself for 2 hours and say, come back with the name of the game. You want to get a bunch of people together. You want to put a bunch of sticky notes up on the board. You want to have a lot of different ideas from a lot of different people so that you can then start to winnow them down. Other kinds of problems call for a small group to work on that, people with a certain expertise. So if you're trying to hash out, for example, how a certain feature fits into the core loop of your game, you don't want 10 people in that meeting. You want 3 people in that meeting, maybe 4. 4's like one too many. Then still there's another kind of problem that you look at this and you go, you know what? Somebody has already solved this problem. I don't have to solve this problem. Somebody's already done it. Who is that person? How can I find them? And how can I suck the knowledge out of their brain? How can I go have a one-on-one session with this guy or this woman in order to learn what they know? But then there's a kind of problem that needs to be solved just by one person sitting down by themselves and thinking. And this is the kind of creative session that we often need most often, but we don't get to have in the context of our business life, because everything is hectic, everything's under deadline, there's too much to worry about. Going back to Csikszentmihalyi, he wrote about flow. Flow is the mental state in which a person performing an activity is fully immersed in this feeling of energized focus. Some people call it being in the zone. Focus is what happens when all of your attention is focused on a single problem that you're solving and everything else seems to fall away. Programmers experience this when they're writing a tricky bit of code and they come out of this hours later and don't realize how much time has passed. Artists, when they're sometimes doing drawings, intricate stuff, trying to figure things out, they come out of this experience hours later and realize that they missed lunch or forgot to eat. The theory behind flow is that people only have a limited amount of attention, and Csikszentmihalyi actually measured this in percentages and that sort of thing. And he discovered that when people are in conversation or are doing things other than focusing on their task, they don't have complete involvement. And so the goal is to enter this flow state. So if this state is so important, how can we invite it into our lives? How can we intentionally create time in a session where we will enter this state of flow?